true, scary experiences from remote places. 4 horror stories. Story 1, submitted by Daniel from Missoula, Montana. I don't talk about that winter anymore, at least not to anyone who knew me back then. People in Missoula are polite, but they've learned to step lightly around the topic. They'll ask how the trail conditions are, or how early the snow's coming in, but no one asks if I still volunteer for the search and rescue runs up near Lolo Pass. I don't. I won't. Because I learned something in those woods 3 years ago, something that doesn't feel like it should be mine to know. Back then, I tried to spend every spare weekend in the mountains. Photography was the excuse. Solitude was the real reason. I'd take my pack, head out past the maintained trails, and wander until I found something worth shooting. A frozen creek, an elk skull thawing out of the snowpack, a view that made me feel like a speck drifting inside a postcard. That weekend in February had started the same way. A long hike, a quiet trail, clean, cold air that burned my lungs in a way I found oddly comforting. The only thing I was worried about was daylight. Winter days up here are shorter than you ever expect them to be, even when you're used to them. By 4:30, you can feel the world dimming at the edges. I remember checking the time, 3:52 p.m., and telling myself I had maybe an hour to hike back to the truck. I turned around on the ridge I'd been photographing, retracing my own boot prints through a couple inches of fresh powder. The forest was dead quiet. No wind, no birds, nothing. About 10 minutes into the hike back, I noticed the silence had changed. It hadn't gotten louder or quieter, just closer, like leaning your ear too near a shell and suddenly hearing your own pulse inside it. Everything felt thick, heavy, expectant. I told myself it was the weather shifting, maybe another front moving in. Then I saw the first track. At first glance, I thought it was a bear print, because what else leaves something that big? But the shape was wrong. Too long, too narrow, with a drag mark behind it, like whatever made it had trouble lifting its foot. The print ran perpendicular across my path, cutting through the snow in a straight line. I crouched down and touched the impression. Under the fresh powder, the snow was older and compacted. This thing had walked through earlier in the day, maybe even the night before. I stood up slowly, scanning the woods. The trees were dense on both sides of the trail, the kind that grow tall and close and make everything look like a dark hallway. I couldn't see more than 20 yards in either direction. My brain kept trying to offer explanations. Elk, moose, some kind of distorted track from melting. But none of them stuck. The shape was too precise, too intentional. I told myself to keep moving. Another 5 minutes passed, and the tracks crossed the trail again, this time angled slightly, and then again, and again. Each time I followed them with my eyes into the forest, trying to see where they led, but the light was dying and the woods were nothing but shadow. I was sweating under my coat, even though the temperature was dropping fast. Around 4:25, I realized something that made my stomach flip. I hadn't seen my own tracks in a while. I stopped and stared at the snow behind me. Blank, smooth, undisturbed. The snowfall had stopped hours earlier. My prints should have been clear as day. I had been following what I thought was my own path back toward the ridge, but now it dawned on me that the trail looked subtly wrong, straighter, narrower, lacking the small scuffs and missteps I always left behind without thinking. I hadn't been walking back toward my truck. I had been walking deeper. I did a slow turn, trying to orient myself. The sky was a washed-out blue, the kind that hides direction. Everything looked identical in every direction. I took a step, then stopped when I realized what I was stepping toward. The long tracks. They were ahead of me now, cutting cleanly through the snow. And they weren't old. The edges were sharp, undisturbed, fresh within minutes. I knelt again, though every instinct begged me not to. The snow inside the print was melted, not much but enough to see the glaze of water. Something warm had passed through here moments earlier. My throat clenched, the kind of panic that tastes metallic. I straightened and backed away carefully. Then I heard it. A soft, deliberate exhale. Not an animal grunt, not the creak of a tree. An exhale. Human enough to understand, wrong enough to fear. I froze. Another breath, slightly to my right this time. Closer. I didn't run. Not at first. Some old training, or maybe just pure terror, kept me still. My ears strained so hard it hurt. The breaths came again, quiet but long, like something with enormous lungs was pacing just out of view between the pines. I whispered. Why did I whisper? Hello? Everything stopped. Not just the breathing, the forest, the wind that had barely started to pick up. Even the distant hum of passing cars from the highway far below. All of it dead silent. Then the breathing returned, but now it was right behind me. I bolted. No thought, no direction, just instinct screaming run. Branches snapped under my boots as I tore through brush, ignoring the burn in my legs, the stitch in my ribs. I kept expecting to feel something grab the back of my coat or hear a crash behind me, but there was nothing. Just my own breathing and the frantic slap of snow beneath me. When I finally broke through a line of trees, I stumbled onto something familiar. A marker post. Trail 12B. The one that led back to the turnout where I'd parked. I don't remember the last half mile. I just remember the safety lights of my truck blinking in the dim twilight as I fumbled for my keys with shaking hands. I didn't look back until I was inside with the doors locked. The forest was still, quiet, empty. But the snow beside the turnout wasn't empty. There were tracks, long ones, narrow, dragging slightly at the tip. They stopped about 10 feet from my truck. They did not continue into the woods. They ended there. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't go past maintained trails. And when winter comes early to Montana and the woods turn still and heavy, I try not to think about the sound that still wakes me some nights. A long, deliberate exhale, as if something is still out there, patient, waiting for me to come back. A mistake it refuses to believe I won't make twice. Story 2. Submitted by Haley from Ketchikan, Alaska. I used to think isolation was peaceful. Growing up in Ketchikan, you learn to live with long stretches of quiet, the kind that presses against your eardrums until you start listening to your own heartbeat just to prove you're still there. Most people I know find comfort in that silence. I did too, until the night the forested islands off the coast reminded me that silence can also mean you're being listened to. This happened 2 summers ago when I was working seasonal maintenance for the Tongass National Forest. My job wasn't glamorous. Hauling boards, clearing brush, replacing trail signs, sweeping out those little pit toilets that hikers pretend not to need. But it paid well, and it kept me outdoors, which was all I wanted at 19. That Friday, my supervisor asked if I could take the skiff out to one of the smaller islands, Hansen Island, to check on an old outpost cabin used mostly by wildlife techs during surveys. A hiker had reported the door hanging open, and since the cabin was supposed to stay bolted to keep bears out, they needed someone to go check it before the next rotating team arrived. I volunteered. It was a simple errand, and besides, I liked the ride. The water was flat, the sky low and gray, and the air tasted like salt and cedar. I reached the island early afternoon, tied off the skiff, and followed the narrow trail into the woods. Hansen Island isn't big, maybe a couple miles across, but once you're in the trees, it feels endless. Everything is moss and shadows and old-growth giants that blot out the sky, the kind of place where sound shouldn't travel far. But it did that day. I heard something moving before I even reached the cabin. Not the typical forest sounds, no birds, no rustling leaves, just a steady, slow shuffling somewhere parallel to the trail. I figured it was a deer, or maybe a bear, which wasn't great, but nothing I hadn't handled before. I kept walking. The cabin came into view about 10 minutes later, a dark wooden structure raised slightly off the ground, with a small deck and a single window. Everything looked normal. No claw marks, no broken glass, no sign of forced entry. The door, however, was open just a crack. I approached slowly, calling out in case a bear had wandered inside. "Hey, coming in!" My voice sounded too small in the heavy quiet. I pushed the door open. The interior was dim but tidy. Bunk, table, small wood stove, propane lantern. Nothing disturbed. I checked the corners, then shut the door and slid the metal bolt into place. Probably just wind, I thought. Or maybe the last tech forgot to fasten it. I radioed my supervisor, told him the cabin was secure, and started walking back to the beach. About 5 minutes into the hike, I realized I was hearing the shuffling again. Only, this time it was behind me. I turned, scanning the trees. Nothing, just moss hanging in long frayed curtains from every branch. I picked up my pace. 40 seconds later, the sound matched me. My steps, then its steps, always a few beats behind. Not louder, not closer, just following. The trail curved through a cluster of spruce, and that's when I caught the shape. Something tall, far taller than me, standing between the trees. I didn't see details, only the silhouette. I stopped walking instantly, and so did it. We stayed like that for maybe 5 seconds. Then it stepped backward, slow and deliberate, disappearing into the shadows. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep moving. I didn't run yet. I've learned that running from a large animal usually ends worse. I just walked faster. But as soon as I sped up, it did too. I heard it clearly now. Step, step, step. A dragging sound, like something heavy brushing the ground. When I rounded the final bend, the ocean should have been ahead of me. The light should have changed. I should have heard the water. But instead, I stepped into a stretch of forest I didn't recognize. Denser, darker, wrong. I checked my GPS, but the screen was frozen, blinking a static-filled map that refused to orient. The salt smell was gone. Everything felt damp and stale, like a cave. I turned in a full circle, panicking now. Every direction looked the same. Thick trunks, low branches, almost no undergrowth. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and that's probably why it took me so long to realize. I didn't hear the steps anymore. The forest was silent, completely. Something brushed the back of my coat. I spun around so fast I nearly fell, but nothing was there. Just a long strip of moss swaying slightly, though I hadn't touched it. The tree trunks around me were spaced wider here, and for a moment I thought I saw movement between them. Something tall, leaning, like a figure adjusting its weight. I whispered, "Please don't." The words came out without me thinking. The forest exhaled, a slow, deep, almost human breath that rushed through the branches, though no wind followed. It came from everywhere at once, above me, behind me, all around me. Then the trees shifted, not moved like living things, but rearranged. The spacing changed. Paths appeared where none had been. I don't know how to explain it. It felt like the whole island was leaning in, distorting perspective. Something was hurting me. I backed away, trembling, until my boot hit something solid. A wooden step. My heart nearly stopped. Somehow, impossibly, I was standing in front of the cabin again. The door was open, wide open. I had bolted it. I knew I had. The interior was pitch black, darker than any unlit cabin should be in daylight. Then I saw a shape inside, just the faintest outline of something too tall to stand straight in that small space. It bent unnaturally, like its head was brushing the ceiling. I ran. I didn't care if I tripped, didn't care if I fell into the water or the skiff or the rocks. I ran like something was holding a hand just inches behind my spine. When I got to the beach, the tide had risen higher than I remembered, swallowing most of the shoreline. The skiff rocked violently, as if something had shoved it. I jumped in, untied the line with clumsy fingers, and shoved off so hard I nearly lost the oar. I didn't look back until I was halfway to open water. The tree line was still. The cabin was hidden. But I swear to God I saw something step out onto the beach, just one long shape, upright, still, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. When I reached the main island, my supervisor said I looked pale enough to faint. I told him a bear spooked me, and he believed it. I didn't correct him. I've taken the skiff out plenty of times since then, but never to Hansen Island, never anywhere near it. Because sometimes, on still days, when the water is glassy and the fog holds sound the way a jar holds air, I swear I can hear it again. That long, patient exhale, like it remembers me, like it's waiting for the quiet to bring me back. Story 3, submitted by Michael from Carlsbad, New Mexico. There are stretches of the desert here that don't feel like part of the world, not in the cosmic or mystical sense, more like they've slipped out of step with the rest of reality and no one bothered to fix it. When you drive long enough through southeastern New Mexico, past the oil pads and the cattle fences and the dry riverbeds that haven't seen water in years, you eventually hit places where even the road looks uneasy, wavering in the heat like it wants to disappear. I used to love those long drives. I'd take my old Tacoma and just go. No music, no destination, just the road and the rust-red dust collecting under my nails. It was meditative, or at least it used to be. This happened on a Sunday afternoon, late September, right before the time of year when the desert cools off just enough to make you think it's safe. I'd been visiting a friend on the outskirts of Carlsbad and decided to take a back route home, a stretch called Red Basin Road, which winds through miles of scrub and limestone outcrops. No service, no houses, just space. It was around 5 p.m. when my engine started knocking. Not terribly, just enough to make me pull over and pop the hood. The heat hit me like a shove when I stepped out, dry, metallic, shimmering. I checked the belts, the coolant, everything basic. Nothing looked wrong. When I turned the ignition again, the knocking vanished. The desert does that. It breaks things and then fixes them when you're not looking. I got back on the road. Maybe 10 minutes later, I drove through a patch of air so cold it fogged my windshield from the outside. I jerked back in surprise. The temperature dropped at least 30 degrees in a heartbeat. The sun was still high, sky blue, everything perfectly normal except the sudden chill crawling across my skin. Then my radio, turned off, no power, let out a single burst of static. I slowed the truck to a crawl. The air warmed again. The desert went back to beige and blazing. But up ahead, maybe a quarter mile, I saw someone on the side of the road. A woman. She was standing completely still, facing the desert rather than the road, her back to me. Long black hair, a faded red dress that didn't move in the breeze. Except, there was no breeze. The air was dead calm. I pulled closer, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a stranded hiker. Maybe someone whose car broke down. But I didn't see any vehicle, any gear, nothing. When I got close enough to roll down my window, I called out, "Ma'am, you okay?" She didn't turn. I stopped the truck beside her and tried again, louder. Nothing. Not even a flinch. The desert around us was silent. No insects, no wind. Not even the hum of the engine sounded quite right. I stepped out of the truck. The air was cold again. Not freezing, but wrong. Sharp enough to sting the inside of my nose. I approached slowly, boots crunching the gravel. "Ma'am, do you need help?" She turned her head halfway, not toward me, but slightly over her shoulder, as if listening to something behind her. Her face was grayish, like she'd been standing under fluorescent lights too long. That's when I noticed something odd. Her shadow. It wasn't cast by the sinking sun like mine. It fell in the opposite direction. A long, thin smear stretching toward me. A knot of fear twisted hard in my stomach. I took a step back. When I blinked, just one reflexive blink, she was facing me. No movement, no transition, just there. Her features weren't monstrous. That's what made it worse. Her eyes were dark and wet, like someone who'd just surfaced from deep water. Her dress looked older up close, frayed and sun-bleached. She didn't look threatening, just exhausted, hollow. "Do you live out here?" I asked, my voice too thin. Her lips parted like she was about to answer, but the sound that came out wasn't speech. It was a dry, crackling whisper, like wind scraping against sand, but layered, as if more than one voice was speaking. I couldn't understand the words, but the tone crawled through me, pleading, desperate. The desert behind her shimmered, the horizon bending like heat haze. But there was no heat, only cold. The sky took on a flat color like a sheet of paper. Every instinct in my body screamed, "Leave." I stumbled backward, fumbling for the truck door. When I glanced at her again, she was closer. 5 feet closer. No movement. Just suddenly nearer, like the world around her skipped a frame. I threw myself inside the truck and slammed the door. My hands shook so hard I could barely get the keys into the ignition. The engine refused to turn over. Dead. Silent. She pressed a hand to the window. Not violent, just gentle, the way someone might touch a newborn's face. But her handprint fogged the glass with cold. Every fingertip left a small circle of frost. Her eyes met mine through the window. And then, I swear this is true, the desert behind her shifted, like fabric being pulled, a seam opening, a darker landscape bleeding through the pale afternoon. I saw jagged shapes, towers of stone, a horizon that slanted upward as if gravity were different there. She whispered again, that layered voice, louder this time. My radio, still off, burst into static and garbled words. Not English, not any language I recognized. The steering wheel vibrated under my grip. I don't know how long the moment lasted. Time felt stretched, thinned out, like a rubber band pulled to breaking. Then, as suddenly as it started, warmth rushed back into the air. My engine roared to life. The woman stepped back, her eyes dimming, her shadow snapping into the correct direction like someone repositioning a prop. I drove. I didn't look in the mirrors, didn't slow down, didn't breathe properly until I hit the highway, where the traffic and the hum of normal life made the world feel real again. When I finally forced myself to check the rear view, the road behind me was empty, just desert and sun and miles of nothing. But when I reached home and parked in my driveway, I saw something on the passenger side window. Faint, frosted over, already fading in the heat. A handprint. Not mine. I wiped it off before it melted. Some places in the desert don't feel like part of the world. And some things out there look like they're waiting for you to step just a little too far into theirs. Story 4, submitted by Laura from Bluefield, West Virginia. People joke that Appalachia has places the maps don't mean. I grew up hearing that, like it was just another mountain superstition, right up there with burying coins under a new porch or never whistling after dark. I didn't believe any of it. Not until last October, when I took a shortcut through a hollow my grandmother used to call the Bad Bend. She'd warned me about it my whole life. Not jokingly either, quietly, the way you warn a child not to walk into traffic. I should have listened. It was around 6 p.m. when I left work that day. October in Bluefield gets dark early, and the sky was already fading into that dull purple that looks like a bruise. My phone had died halfway through my shift, so I couldn't check the weather. But the air had that heavy feel, thick, like the clouds were sinking lower than they should. The main road was closed for repaving, so I took the old lane that loops through the foothills. Everyone local knows it. 1 lane wide, no real shoulder, turns sharp enough to make you pray. Halfway down, there's a narrow road that cuts into a hollow most people avoid, the Bad Bend. When I passed the turnoff, I slowed. The fog was rolling down the mountainside in long sheets, and the usual route looked swallowed by it. The cutoff road, though, was clear, too clear, like the fog didn't want to drift there. I told myself I was being dramatic. I took the turn. The hollow opened wide at first, full of bare sycamores and a few scattered hunting cabins. But after the third curve, something felt off. The trees grew taller, wrong tall, stretched like shadows at sunset. And the road narrowed until my tires hugged the ditch on both sides. I glanced at the clock on my dash. 6:17 p.m. When I looked back up, the road wasn't the same. Not drastically, just subtly different. Straighter, cleaner. No potholes, no leaf litter. Like someone had laid fresh pavement, except the surface wasn't black. It was a dull gray, almost chalky, like old concrete. I slowed to a crawl. My headlights seemed dimmer than usual, swallowed by the dark in a way that didn't make sense. I kept expecting to see the next curve, but the road stayed straight, running deeper and deeper into the trees. Then the radio turned on by itself. Just a soft hum at first, like someone tuning through dead stations. I reached to turn it off, but the button didn't respond. I held it down. Nothing. The hum grew louder, resolving into something like a woman's voice, not speaking, not singing, just breathing in and out, slow and steady. My hand started shaking. "Not now," I muttered, slapping the power button again. The voice inhaled sharply, as if startled. Then the radio went silent. A few seconds later, I saw headlights ahead. Relief hit me so hard I almost cried. Another car. Someone else out here. I slowed, expecting them to pass. But the headlights didn't move. They just hovered in place, bright and white. I rolled to a stop about 30 feet away. My brights illuminated a shape, an old sedan, maybe 1970s, pale blue, rust around the wheel wells. No driver visible. I waited. 1 second, 2. Something knocked on my back window. Once. Light, like someone tapping politely. I screamed. I couldn't help it. I slammed the truck into drive and floored it, swerving around the parked car. As I passed it, I saw the interior clearly. All the seats were gone. Not ripped out, just gone. Missing, like the car had been built hollow. The road ahead warped. The trees leaned inward, branches knitting together overhead like a tunnel. My headlights flickered. The fog behind me rolled forward, climbing the hood of the truck as if pulled. Then the radio turned back on. Not a voice this time. A laugh. My grandmother's laugh. I nearly veered off the road. She'd been dead 8 years, but I knew that sound. Soft. Breathless. Like she was holding back a joke. "Laura," she said, her voice threading through the speakers. "You went where you weren't meant to go." My eyes filled with tears. "Stop it," I whispered. "Please stop." "You turn around now," she said. "You won't get out." I felt cold down to my bones. "I'm trying," I said. "I'm trying, Grandma." Her voice lowered. "No, baby. You keep driving." The radio crackled, warping her last word until it sounded stretched, like someone pulling it out of her mouth. Driving, driving, drieving. Something moved in my rearview mirror, a shape in the fog, tall, pale, bent at the middle like it was leaning close to the truck. I couldn't see its face, just long fingers pressed to the glass, dragging slowly across it as if marking me. I pushed the gas harder. The road buckled like heat haze. My vision tunneled. Every instinct screamed that the hollow wasn't letting me leave. Then, out of nowhere, a stop sign appeared in my headlights. Just a normal stop sign at a 4-way intersection I'd never seen before. Fresh paint, reflective, real. I blew through it going 50, nearly losing control. And behind me, everything went black. No fog, no warped trees, no other car. Just the normal old mountain road leading down toward Bluefield, the sky now a soft, early night blue like nothing had happened. I didn't stop driving until I reached my house. When I finally climbed out, my legs gave out from under me. On the back window of my truck, 3 long streaks ran down the glass. Not scratches, not dirt. Just clear lines where the condensation had been wiped away, like fingers. I called my mom that night and asked her about the bad bend. She went quiet for a long time before saying, "Your grandma didn't make that up, honey. Some places in the mountains don't belong to us." I haven't driven that road since, and sometimes late at night when the fog drifts low enough to touch the street outside my house, I swear I hear that laugh again, soft, breathless,